Hello and welcome to Colloquium. We're here doing another first for Colloquium. It's just been a month or two of firsts. This is our first virtual podcast. So I'm here at our usual studio and Nick's at home. He's been a little under the weather. Actually, you've had COVID. You're recovering. I think you're done with your quarantine technically, right? But we're just
Yeah,
playing it safe at this point.
yeah, I am. I'm out and about as of today, actually. So, yeah, I'm out of prison. I'm here in my COVID lair, as I've taken to calling it. Me and my apartment have gotten very familiar over these past 10 days, as I'm sure some of our listeners can relate to. So, um, anyway,
Yeah, so what's that been like? I don't know. I've never had to do, I think, a full 14-day quarantine. I've definitely had to isolate at certain times when there's possible exposure. But what's that been like for you being cooped up for a full 2 weeks?
yeah. So I actually have been in my apartment for 11 days, I guess, almost
Okay.
11 days. I just did that. They reduced it to 10 days, the quarantine, I think. I hope. No, but I reduced it to 10 days. So I just had the measly 10-day quarantine. But listen, I'm just not a big fan. I had to say, I, I literally did not leave my apartment except for like standing on my balcony a couple times for a couple minutes. And I opened the door a couple of times when some generous friends of mine brought me a meal or a care package.
Yeah.
Um, but other than that, I did not leave my apartment, which was I wouldn't use the word exhilarating to call that for the experience, but
Did you
it
get
was
some
definitely a
reading done
unique
or
one.
anything?
Oh my, yeah. I tell you what, me and Sherlock Holmes, we are buddies.
All right.
Yeah. So my brother got me it's good timing because my brother Ben got me the complete set of Sherlock Holmes for Christmas. Um yeah, I just took to reading those stories over the quarantine period, and yeah, that was kind of a big consolation for me, spending a lot of time reading that and reading the scriptures, and honestly playing way too much on my phone and watching way too much TV that got like really sickening by the end of the 10
Sure.
days. So, um, yeah, that was definitely a struggle, I had to say.
Sure. I'm
Um,
a little bit surprised that even with all that time you had on your hands, you still didn't update your fantasy basketball lineups.
yeah, yeah,
I
so,
think Madison pulled off a victory against you this
hang
past
on.
week.
See, I don't even know. Is that bad? So, anyway, I had to tell our listeners, there's this famous player called John Morant. He plays for Memphis. He's one of my favorite
Mhm.
players. So my team is called More Ant. 2 words. It's a pun. Anyway,
Yeah,
um,
you think you're clever. We
so,
get it.
yeah. So he got injured, and I took to calling our team Less Ant, which I thought that was clever. So
Almost as
anyway,
clever as more ant.
yeah, but no, I did not. I did not update the lineup very well. Anyway, yeah. So
Yeah,
quarantine was fun.
good. Well, I'm glad that you made the most of it. I think reading would be my consolation in the midst of that as well. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm sure, yeah, I think it drives you crazy to be stuck inside for that long. And I think that's been a lot of people's experience over the last almost year now. We've been dealing with this. There's just been a lot of that isolation. And our topic today, I think that's going to play right into maybe not immediately obvious, but I think that um, I think it'll make sense when we start talking about it. So our topic is the parish and the Eucharist. And the reason we chose this theme, we actually didn't choose it. Our bishop, the Bishop Reka of the Diocese of Birmingham, has made that the theme, the what do you call it? The theme of the liturgical year.
Yeah, just I guess the theme. That's a good word.
Okay, yeah.
Good
There's
pick.
probably a better word for it, a more technical word, but
Right.
anyway, it's this liturgical year in the Diocese of Birmingham is the year of the parish and the Eucharist. And I think that's intentional. I think it has something to do with, I think both of those two things are really important, especially in a year where we're combating isolation due to the pandemic that we're in.
Right. Yeah, I think this is very wisely picked by our bishop. So I'm excited to get into ins and outs of this. I think he paired those two things together, of course, because really we could bracket the Eucharist underneath parish almost. But I think it's so important and unique that I think it's kind of worth putting as its own word for to kind of draw its importance to attention throughout this year. So.
Right. Yeah, so let's maybe start there and talk about why these two are connected. Because I think at first thought it's like, okay, well, I've heard of things like the year of the parish or the year of the Eucharist, but why the parish and the Eucharist? Why do you think it was Bishop Raka decided to lump those two together?
Yeah, that's a great point. I did allude to my view of why there a couple seconds ago, but I think the parish is centers around the Eucharist. So kind of the Eucharist is implied when we talk about a parish. But again, just to draw to light the central focus of what a parish is and what a parish and really who a parish is for.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately the Eucharist is Jesus Christ, right? And a parish should be centered around that. I think one thing that also came to mind for me in thinking about why is this the focus is I've actually been praying and thinking a lot about theology of the body lately, actually, and just the connection in that, and really in our faith in general, there is between the Eucharist and ultimately marriage, and just thinking about how the Eucharist, the Mass, ultimately is the consummation of the marriage between Christ and his church. And so when we think of the parish and the Eucharist, right, the parish is a community where people come together to celebrate the Mass. It's where the church, the bride, meets the bridegroom, Christ. So ultimately, I think the parish and the Eucharist have to be tied together because Christ and the church have to be tied together. Where Christ is, there is the church. Where the church is, there is Christ.
right. Absolutely. Yeah, I think too, also just in a mystical sense, we are the body of Christ, so when we consume the Eucharist, we, in a sense, become the Eucharist. We become Christ as a member of his body. So, in a sense, our parish community, me and you and whoever's in our parishes, are the Eucharist, are Christ, really in a mystical, true sense as we go out into our communities. So, yeah, they're definitely intimately tied.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Intimately, I think, is a key word. And I think that's a theme that I plan on tracing this conversation, at least, because I think intimacy is something that we crave in a pandemic, and I think something that both the parish and the Eucharist provide. And I think we'll touch on that, I think, in more detail later. But I also want to talk about, so we talked about why those two are connected, but why this year? Why 2021? Why is this the year of the parish and the Eucharist?
Yeah, I think smartly picked by our bishop, just for the obvious sense in which, I would venture to say most Catholics are staying away from the parish community because of COVID
and the
concerns. And
Eucharist.
right, yeah, exactly
Yeah.
right. Yeah, staying away from the Eucharist by virtue of that, because of COVID concerns or fears, and the whole deal of I can witness Mass or kind of quote unquote experience the Eucharist online. So why do I need to go? Why do I need to get up off my couch? Kind of a thing. So yeah, and in short, people are staying away more so than ever. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And I think it comes back to that intimacy as well, right? So with this isolation, we lack this intimacy that human relationships provide for us, but ultimately that we find its fulfillment in God. And I think we really have that longing increases when there's that separation from both the parish and the Eucharist. So I think the year of 2021 is a good year to refocus us on those two things, because those two things are going to draw us into real community. And I think real community, that's something that we've really been lacking in as a church, as a world in the last 12 months or so. So I think it is very timely, absolutely. And ultimately, I think what we want to do is we want to dive deeper into what are these two things, and how can we celebrate the year of the parish and the Eucharist, but think about what that might look like. So I think how we should start out is talking about the parish. So when you think about a parish, the first thing actually I have here on parish is I think that it's important to go into a little bit I think it's interesting at least the etymology, not endemology, but etymology. There's different mology that starts with E words, and I get them mixed up, but I think it's etymology. It means like where a word comes from. Something similar to that is like the study of bugs. I think it's entomology, study of bugs.
Yeah. I don't know. I always get all those fancy word confused. You're the theologian, so I'll let you do the Greek here.
I met this is so tangential, but I met an I know an entomologist, whatever the one that studies bugs.
Yeah, it's not. So I think you got it right. Etymologist is not the bug. So
Okay,
whatever.
great. Okay. Anyway, so anyway, the word parish ultimately has roots in the Greek word parochia. And so this is just basically like a quick Google search brings up the words, but so one of the kind of definitions was given was sojourning in a foreign land, dwelling beside a stranger or a sojourner. So we have this idea of like a pilgrimage. And then it was also related, I didn't put this on the sheet, but it was also related to, I saw one that it was related to the word subsidiarity, actually. And so it's this kind of local, so like a parish is like a local community, essentially. And then the other Greek word it was related to is oikos, which means house, literally. So essentially it's like a gathering place of local community is the best I can gather from those roots there. Which I think is maybe a good way of understanding it, right? A parish is a local community that gathers ultimately to celebrate the Eucharist. But I thought that was a little bit interesting to think about the root there.
Yeah, I am. That's actually really. I'm really interested by the sojourning in a foreign land kind of definition of the Greek word there. I won't embarrass myself by pronouncing it, but um, yeah, just it's and combining those two words, it's a house, a dwelling place for sojourners, for strangers in a foreign land,
Yeah.
which is really beautiful because that's kind of what we are, right? We're a community, the body of Christ, gathering together in our sort of temporary home while we venture to heaven. Yeah, it's really a beautiful etymology of the word.
Yeah, I think so too. And while we're talking about the word parish, I remember when I first visited Louisiana, if anybody's been to Louisiana, they call their counties parishes. But this really threw me off. I imagine it's probably related to the French Catholic influence because it's also I think there's some French influence in the word. But I got there and they're like, oh, like such and such parish over there or such and such parish. I'm like, are we just referring to like geography in terms of Catholic churches? But no, it turns out that that's just what they call counties. The county is a
Right.
parish.
Huh.
But I think it comes from ultimately the same idea of like a parish is a local community of people.
Right.
So I think also what we want to talk about is ultimately what makes a good parish, or I think even better, I think a conversation we've had before is what makes an ideal parish. Like if you're deciding on a parish to register at, what are the things you look for?
Yeah, I think a different way to frame the question too, it's the same question, but a different way to frame it is what makes a parish that people want to go back to?
Yeah.
For all of these people that are staying away, yeah, what makes a parish inviting in the sense that they want to venture back?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think one of the first thing that we have down here, they're not necessarily in order of importance, but first thing we have down here is a beautiful liturgy. We want the Mass to be a beautiful experience, which we can break that down a little more. You want the first go at it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this is essential. It's definitely something that I think of that goes on my list of, if I'm picking a parish, right? I want a liturgy where I encounter beauty. Now, we could do a whole nother podcast and we probably will at some point on actually the liturgy and talk about what belongs in a liturgy. But I think ultimately what this means is it's somewhere where you go and the liturgy, the music, the reverence, the way the priest offers the Mass, right? It leads you to God. And it is an encounter in some way with beauty, right? So the Mass, ultimately, Jesus Christ is present in the Mass. And no matter what, in a valid Mass, the priest, the body, when the priest says, "This is my body, this is my blood," right? The bread and wine become the body and blood of Christ, and Christ is present in that Mass. Now, we can have daily Masses where you just kind of go through the motions, and you can, or hopefully you don't just go through the motions, but where there's not as much music and there's not as much, there's not all the instruments and all the kind of added things we bring into the liturgy. But I think that these things that don't affect the validity of it, right? But they affect our experience of it. So I think there are things, whether it's the way the priest celebrates the Mass or the way in which the music is done, I think that draw us into, via, I think, the way of beauty, draw us into the truth and the reality of the Mass. And I think having that be beautiful, I think, is really important.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot there. One of the things that comes to mind too is, or a question that I would ask, if whether or not the liturgy is beautiful, is, does it engage the senses in a way that raises the mind and heart to Christ? Kind of what I mean is things like, is the music beautiful? Does it lead to contemplation of Christ? That's an obvious one. Is the visual aspect of the Mass? Are we seeing things that are beautiful and bringing our minds to Christ? We could talk a little bit later about the beautiful church and kind of what that means, but that's what I mean. Just a beautiful sanctuary helps with the liturgy. Also, incense. Your sense of smell too. Is that that helps lift your heart, mind and heart to Christ. So yeah, are the senses being engaged in the liturgy in a way that leads to Christ? That'd be a question I would ask.
Yeah, I think that those are great examples. And I think that ultimately, I think beauty in the liturgy, it's one of those things where, we could debate what belongs, what kind of music, and we could get into all the technicals, right? But I think it's also something that, like, when you see it, you know it. I think of a few, like, in particular, a few beautiful liturgies that I've encountered that, just draw you in. And whether that's, I've had some really experiences of the Latin Mass where it just is really captivating, the beauty there. But even just, I remember I used to love going to our Cathedral of St. Paul here when I lived in Birmingham. And just the way, just like the jubilation, particularly just like when they did hymns, there's typically like traditional hymns played well with an organ. They had an incredible choir, incredible scola. And I just remember, like, I always loved the closing hymn because on the closing hymn, they would do, a few verses. And then before the last verse, there'd be kind of like I'm not a musician, so forgive me, but like, I think it's like when you pull out all the stops, essentially, is where that like phrase comes from. But it's like a little organ solo. And then like it gets louder and everybody like joins in for the final verse, and it just culminates in this like really loud, jubilant hymn of praise to God. And I just remember that always was something that really, was really moving. And it, like you said, it captured my senses to the reality of what was going on in the Mass. And I think that's the role that beauty can play in the liturgy.
Right. Amen. Yeah. I think you mentioned too, just having like a jubilant community too that celebrates the Mass well is also something that brings a ton to the liturgy. Just having a community that's willing to engage in the Mass excitably and passionately.
Yeah, I remember going to a Mass in Georgia once. I don't even remember the name of the parish, but I remember it struck me because it wasn't the most traditional looking parish, or like the most traditional looking church. It was not like, I wouldn't say it was like a beautiful church. The liturgy, the liturgy was good. It wasn't like the most beautiful liturgy I had ever seen, but I remember there was this profound thing where in the Gloria at the beginning of Mass, at the name of Jesus Christ, everybody's head in the church bowed. And I just saw this like profound, like unified sign of reverence that was shown in that liturgy that was really profound. Just that little thing in and of itself. I think of, when you go to churches and you see people receiving communion on the knees or on the tongue, right? I think there's, again, aside from debates about, how should you receive communion, et cetera, right? Like there's a beauty of that. Like, when people are coming up, like there's a reverence that I think, at least for me, it draws me deeper into the mystery.
Yeah, another example too. Those are great examples. Another example too that I think of is at the end of Mass when the whole parish kneels and prays after Mass is over and Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
always just a really beautiful experience that kind of moves me and says that
Yeah.
this parish is faithful and dynamic.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. And then another one, as you were saying that, I think of like the focus tradition of singing the Salve together
Right.
after Mass. Everybody would, I think before we all kneeled and did our Thanksgiving, it was
Right.
saying the Salve in unison, which is just, that was always a really, really incredible thing for me as well.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah. Wow. Great. Wow. We totally went after the beautiful liturgy
Yeah, Nick
aspect.
was like, yeah, we're just gonna brush over the liturgy.
Yeah.
So I think another one that we actually, I'll question this. Well, no. I think this is an essential. Never mind. But I think we'd both agree on that this one is kind of essential. A holy pastor. And I think with that, I'd probably say Orthodox, right? A heretical pastor would
Right.
probably make a bad parish.
Yeah.
But
I would argue.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I would argue that a holy pastor would in fact be Orthodox. I don't think an
Right.
Orthodox pastor would.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we're on the same page there.
Yeah, I think so. And I think of the phrase too, like, I always forget where this originates, but I think it's a phrase that's been around a while in the church. But like essentially, if like the priest is good, the people will be bad. If the priest is holy, the people will be good. If the priest is a saint, the people might be holy. It's like essentially, as the priest is, the people are like one level below that.
Right.
So I think maybe a fairly high standard for the priest because, ultimately they're the shepherd, they're the spiritual leader, and if there's not a holiness and a striving there, I think the parish is going to be stuck and pretty stagnant.
Yeah, that's a high standard. But if we frame that in terms of a father and his family,
Right.
We would say the same thing about the father of a household. He needs to be the one that sets the spiritual standard for his family. And so that's what we would say about the priest as well. Yeah. That makes just a ton of sense to me.
Yeah. So I think those first two we mentioned, I think are more or less non-negotiables if we're talking about a parish that's going to draw people in, right? Beautiful liturgy, holy pastor. I think another one we added there, and this maybe could be debated a little more, but a beautiful actual building. So the sanctuary is something that, I think is able to draw people in. Do you think that this is something you'd mark as like an essential characteristic of a parish?
Well, essential. That's a hard word. I think it's extremely important. I'll say that. I think you can have an incredibly faithful parish community in a building that's ugly. I do. I think that's possible. So I guess the answer to your question is no, it's not essential. But in terms of evangelization, I think it is just so important. If you're going to invite someone into your parish community to kind of experience the Catholic thing, the Mass, for them to go into a parish or a church that's just breathtaking when you walk in. I'm sure we've all had that experience where, I don't know if anyone's been to, the Shrine in DC or, just to any church in a street corner in Rome, where you walk in and it's just absolutely stunning in there. And it demands that you be quiet. It demands reverence. It's like, oh shoot, I can't speak in here. I have to whisper and I need to walk around slowly and be respectful. And, it really does. It just takes your breath away naturally by virtue of its beauty. That is just an incredible gift, an asset for evangelization and for encountering Christ.
Yeah. And I think I'd almost lump this as like, this is like an aspect of, we could put this with beautiful liturgy, right? I think this is one aspect of the beauty that we encounter when we go to a particular parish.
Yeah, I think so, but at the same time, you could have someone walk in and there not be mass going on, just experience the beauty of the
Sure.
church.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there's value to that. All these famous cathedrals around the world frequently have visitors just coming in to check it out without mass going on, which is, I think, a beautiful thing. Um,
Right. Yeah, and the church has such an incredible tradition of beautiful art and beautiful churches. I think of, behind your head right now, I can see on the Zoom call
yeah,
is the Last Supper painting. But things like that, and I haven't hung my new Caravaggio yet, but we got a Vatican flag that's kind of pretty. But
yeah,
yeah, I think just these images, these statues, these things, just the architecture of a church can draw you in, and we have such a rich tradition of that in the church. And yeah, unfortunately, maybe I think that's been lost a little bit in the modern age. I think of that talk. I don't remember what the citation for it would be. That talk you sent me a little while back about like art in the church. You know what I'm talking
yeah.
about?
From her name is Dr. Barbara Nicolosi. Yeah, I encourage listeners to kind of look up her thought and ministry. She's actually a leader in the Christian Hollywood community, and she does a lot of work on
They're
kind of.
Christians in Hollywood?
Yeah, seems like it. No, but she's just an incredibly faithful person, and within Hollywood, doing work in Hollywood, who kind of promotes beauty in that sense. But anyway, she gave a great talk on promoting beauty in the church and in the culture. So
Yeah. Good. Yeah, I think another aspect is, or did you want to say anything else on the beautiful church aspect?
no, I think it's great.
Okay, great. Yeah, then I think the next aspect, and you put this one on here. I might challenge it a little bit,
Okay.
but a dynamic or faithful community. And I don't want to challenge that's a good thing, because it's obviously a good thing, right? But part of me says that this can be built if the other things are in place. So for me, if I'm looking for a parish to go be a part of and evangelize at, right? I think that some of these other things are maybe more the things I'm looking for in a parish, because, and maybe this is just me as somebody who's evangelically minded, but I feel like I can work to build a more dynamic, faithful community, and obviously would want to have friends there, have people that I know I can work with in that parish to build that. But that's kind of my instinct on that is that if the other things are in place, I think you can work with it.
Okay. Yeah. So your thought is that what you mean by it can be built anywhere is that you mean it can be built in any parish is what you mean, right? You think it's not an essential bullet point for a parish specifically.
Yeah, I should say actually it's probably actually easier to build at certain parishes. So I don't mean it can be built at any parish, but I think that maybe this isn't, if I go to a parish and it has the other things and the community's kind of lacking, I think it could still be a good parish, right? Because it could still just be in the early stages of forming that.
Yeah, that's a good point. You think so your thought is that some of the other bullet points that we discussed kind of eventually will imply dynamic or faithful community. They will
Yeah,
lead
I
to
think
it.
they'll lead to it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be willing to side with that. I think yeah, I just know personally that when I'm deciding on a parish, I want to immediately see that community. I want to look around and I want to see people my age that are, showing reverence in the mass, and I want to see people that it looks like I could kind of relate to. So, which may not be a fair way to um, kind of evaluate a parish, but I
You
definitely
know,
do that.
I think that's actually a really good point, come to think of it, because I think that when you think of your average Catholic, what are they looking for? Your average anybody, right? Looking for a church, even in Protestant world, I think especially in Protestant world, right? I think sometimes that's actually the first thing on your list. Like, you want to go somewhere where there's going to be a community to encounter, and there's something there for you to feel like you're a part of. So maybe I dismissed that too quickly, because I think it is absolutely essential. But maybe maybe my thought is that I think in general, and we can talk more about this, but I think this is lacking in most parishes. And so I think my mindset is, I know that that's what I want to build in any parish that I'm a part of. But as far as looking for that, I think I give the parishes a lot of grace, just because I don't know that I see a lot of dynamic, faithful communities and parishes. I think it's rare to find ultimately.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's important to distinguish. I think that this is an important distinguishing factor between Catholicism and the way that we worship, and um, Protestants and the way that they worship. Is I think Protestants would say the community is way more central. And I'm not saying that the Catholicism we don't value community, because the Lord knows that we do, and it's so important. And we need it to thrive as Christians, as Catholic Christians. But I think in Protestantism, it leans on community a little more, in the sense that when we come and worship in the Catholic setting, our center is Christ, is the Mass, in a real tangible sense, and that's what keeps us there. Ideally, it's our community is not grounded in the community; it's grounded in the Eucharist and in who we worship. So.
Right. And I mean, Jesus Christ, like in the Eucharist, he is our source of communion and our source of community too. And I think that it starts there. But I think that's a really, really good point about, I think one of the challenges with, I think, evangelization in the parish for Catholics is just that, right? We have a different environment when you walk in. And it's because of some of these things we talked about, right? It's the beauty draws you in and draws your mind towards God. And ultimately it's a spirit of prayer, right? I remember talking recently to an Anglican friend of mine who is a convert actually to Anglicanism, but one of the things that drew him in and like attracts him about experiencing Catholic churches is that like people come in and they pray, right? Their first instinct is, to kneel down and pray to God. And afterwards as well, like you were saying, with people praying at Thanksgiving in a parish afterwards. So there's something really beautiful about that, and I think necessary, right? Because that is the central, that is central to our liturgy and our worship. But I think it's important to also think about, if that is what our worship is, then how are we creating avenues for relationships to be built after Mass, and in the other activities of the parish?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's so important to recognize too, is that I think I don't want to use the word disadvantage, because that frames the Mass as a disadvantage, but because our gathering space, our normal gathering setting, the Mass is not social. It's
Right.
not inherently social. Like maybe some Protestant faiths have their service is more social. Because ours isn't, it creates, I think, a little bit more of a need outside of the Mass to be more intentional.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I think too, we shouldn't miss the fact that this is actually, I think, always been understood by the church. When you look at the very architecture of a church, you have the sanctuary, right? And then typically you have a vestibule or a narthex, whatever you call it, right? The point of that is to be a gathering place outside of the sanctuary.
right.
And typically it's the place that you walk through on your way in and on your way out. So that's actually built into our church structure a lot of the time, is that gathering place for community before and after Mass. I think some parishes unfortunately have a different structure, and there isn't this central place where everybody comes in and out. But I think that's a really helpful thing that is actually built into the way we've structured our churches.
Yeah, I think that's an important point too that we can ask is that, I don't want to use the word essential because I don't think it is, but is that an important element of a parish, is to have a space like that where people go and they gather after Mass? I would say that it is.
Yeah, I think it's important. And, I think I wouldn't say this is, I think a lot of people do desire that. It's strange, I've talked to a lot of people who actually, something they like about the Catholic Mass, maybe the more introverted people, but it's kind of like, oh, I can just go and pray and like do my thing. I don't
Right.
have to worry about 10 people like introducing themselves. Like, and there's something good about that, right? that they can go and encounter the Mass, and it's less intimidating, I guess, because of that, if you are a little more introverted. But at the same time, I think that's a little bit of shame on us in our
Sure.
communities, that we're allowing people to just come in and out and
Mm.
never get to know them.
Right. Because the Mass, it is communal. We are, as the body of Christ, offering the sacrifice to the Father. It's a communal, aspect. It's not in isolation. So yeah, you're right. We should, work to build up that community, and not leave people in isolation who are coming to our parishes. Maybe that's an action point, for us and for our listeners, is to like hang out in the vestibule after Mass for 10 minutes.
Right.
Maybe bring a friend with you to Mass and hang out and talk to them, and I don't know, just do something of that kind.
Yeah, and I think a practical thing on that too, like be consistent. I think one of the things I've been doing, and some of my friends have been doing lately, is going to the same Mass whenever we can each week. And one of the things we noticed is that we'll see people that we'll know who the regulars are, right? And so you kind of know when there's somebody new, but you also know when there's somebody who kind of comes and tends to sit by themselves and doesn't really talk to anybody afterwards. And so just this past week, not this Sunday, but this past Sunday, I noticed somebody in that situation who had seen weeks on weeks on weeks, always was sitting by herself. I ended up introducing myself and introducing her to my roommates who were with me. And yeah, she just said, like, thanks for doing that. Like, I had seen you guys as well, and had had wanted to say hi, had wanted to introduce myself, but there's also this whole COVID thing where we don't know if we're supposed to like go introduce ourselves to strangers. It's just changed the way we interact. But my point is, I think you can notice when you go regularly, you can notice who's new. You can notice who sits by themselves, and it's not as cold. Kind of, I'm going to go introduce myself to this stranger, and I don't know if they want me to do this or not, right? You can kind of pick up on those things, I think, when there's consistency in where you go.
Yeah. So gosh, we've beat that point to, I think yeah, just maybe in summary, you could tell me if I'm being a knucklehead. But I
You're
think,
being a knucklehead.
yeah. Oh, dang it, I knew it. Anyway, I think, yes, it would be nice if we, could find community already in place that was attractive, but at the same time, we need to work to build it up. We need to kind of plant ourselves and work to build up that community also.
Bingo. I think that was exactly the point I was trying to make from the start, but I think you articulated it much better.
Bada bing, bada boom. Cool.
Bada bop, boom pow.
Oh my.
Okay, I think the last thing we have here is ultimately the frequent availability of the sacraments. I think is important, right? Masses are being offered. Confession, I think, in particular, is being offered. And I think this kind of goes hand in hand. I think of the story of John Vianney, right? He was assigned to this new parish, and it wasn't very vibrant, and he just made himself radically available for confession, right? And sometimes nobody would come, but by just being available for confession, it really renewed the parish. And people started coming, and I think it's kind of a both. What am I trying to say? It's like a parish that has a lot of confession will be vibrant, and a vibrant parish will have a lot of
Right.
will have a lot
Kind
of
of a loop.
confession. Yeah.
Yeah, I will say it's connected to the holy pastor kind of aspect too, because people came to John Vianney, yes, because of his availability, but also because of his incredible ability to read souls and to speak into people's lives and
Sure.
to give them, Christ-like direction, So, yeah, that's definitely connected, I think, to the holy pastor aspect. I think people will maybe engage in the sacraments more if he's present. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's such a beautiful thing. A holy pastor is truly transformative, and I think of a few pastors that I know that are that way, and they're always making the sacraments as available as possible. Like, they know that it is their vocation as a priest to bring the sacraments, and so they're seeking every opportunity to do that. And that's just a beautiful thing to receive as a parishioner, as a sheep in the flock they shepherd, just to receive a shepherd who just desires to serve you. There's nothing like asking a priest for confession or for, anointing of the sick or whatever it might be, and them just like joyfully saying yes and making themselves available.
Yeah, I'm with you. There's something too about specifically confession. I think we keep talking about that, and I think it's a great indicator of the frequency of that confessions are offered. When you see a parish where people get there 30 minutes early to get in line for confession, and the line's an hour long, don't get me wrong, I'm annoyed that I have to stand in line for an hour, but at the same time, it's just a really beautiful thing that to see people in line wanting to be right with God.
Right.
Yeah. It's just a really telltale sign of, this parish knows that they sin. They know they're sinners,
Right.
and they desire the Lord's healing. Just a really great sign of a dynamic parish, I think.
Right. Where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah. And then with that, I think this is kind of an extension of the sacraments, but adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, I think, is, and that'll ultimately, I think, transition into the Eucharist for obvious reasons. But yeah, I think you said it best when you said a holy parish has the Eucharist at the center. And when you said that was just, you typed that on the Google Doc, and I was reading it right off of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. Gosh, whoever put that was beautiful.
That's what I was going for. Yeah.
No, the Holy Spirit, a parish that I've been frequenting in Huntsville, has, or at least they had, perpetual Eucharistic adoration before COVID. They're able to do it daily now, thank God. But I've become convinced, in my time in adoration, that this is an essential for me. I have to attend a parish that offers frequent Eucharistic adoration. I just think it's too much of a grace to be able to pray face to face with God. It's been such a huge influence personally in my life, and just so healing. So I think that's an essential for me.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Yeah, I think it's just one of those staples. I think of adoration. I also think of like Eucharistic processions. Have you ever been to Eucharistic procession?
Let me think really quick. Actually, yes. So, quick tangent. I think maybe the only one I've ever been to or ever seen was in Santiago de Compostela. It was the end of our Camino. It was actually the feast day of
Camino.
Yeah, well, it's a conversation for another time.
Okay.
But yeah, so we were there on the feast of Corpus Christi, and they were doing a procession around Santiago de Compostela. It's really beautiful, kind of a wild experience. The whole town was just kind of centering around this procession. So.
Right, and I think it's something it's so bold in today's day and age to go out into the public square and process with the Blessed Sacrament and the Eucharist. Especially in Protestant America, right? That's such a foreign thing. But I think it just really expresses the faith of the parish ultimately. To see people, in procession, adoring the Blessed Sacrament, on the street, essentially. I think it's just a really beautiful practice, and I think is something that I think it's being revitalized with kind of the revitalization of adoration in general in the church. I think it's something that's being brought back, and just such a beautiful thing. I can't believe you got to do the Camino though, because I prefed that for Focus mission trips, and apparently they didn't want me, so they sent me to England instead. But we know who the favorites are. It's all right.
No, actually, so that was part of me and my friend Benny's kind of that was our post-Focus trip to Europe.
Okay.
So I did it together with my friend outside of Focus.
All right, I'm no longer jealous. I am jealous, just not of. I don't feel slighted.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, I mean, the Eucharist goes with parish. We spent most of this time talking about the parish. We talked about adoration as, I think, something that is important, is a good thing that a healthy parish should have. So, what else do you want to say about the Eucharist and how it ties into this?
Um, yeah, do you mind if I read this quote from J.R.R. Tolkien here that I've written? Because
No,
do you want to give?
I'd prefer only quotes from
Okay,
saints, and he's not canonized. So,
gotcha. Well, I actually lied. This is a direct quote from me, so I'll go
oh,
ahead
okay,
and say it. No,
okay.
I'm just kidding. No,
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
kidding.
Go ahead. Read Mr. Tolkien's quote.
Yeah, okay. I think this is just an extraordinary quote from the Lord of the Rings guy, J.R.R. Tolkien. Yeah, we spent some time with him and C.S. Lewis and G.K. Chesterton a while back. But yeah, I just wanted to share this quote that he said or wrote, I'm not sure which, about the Eucharist. So here it is. Out of the darkness of my life, so much frustrated, I put before you the one great thing to love on earth, the Blessed Sacrament. There you will find romance, glory, honor, fidelity, and the true way of all your loves on earth. Um, and I just love that quote because just remembering who this is coming from. This is coming from Tolkien, who created Lord of the Rings, just like all time great, arguably the greatest all time fantasy, romance, adventure story.
Right.
Um, and he claims the Blessed Sacrament to be um, above all of that. Yeah, just the one great way to that, truly, really, in reality, which
Yeah.
I know just understanding the ramifications of that is, I think, a really huge consolation and source of fulfillment
Right.
for it could be for people nowadays, because yeah, there's this searching. There's this. I watched the latest Avengers movie and wish I was, the hero, and but I'm not because that's not real. Or I wish my
Right.
life was more meaningful or, stand outish than it is now, and
Yeah.
um, really all of those desires find their fulfillment in the Eucharist.
Right. I love that quote. The romance, glory, honor, fidelity. All of those are found in the Blessed Sacrament. And Tolkien's a writer, right? I think writers are someone who have an incredible just I think sense of the divine sometimes. I think ultimately like um they have a sense of mystery, and they communicate that mystery. And ultimately the greatest mystery is the Blessed Sacrament, that God becomes present to us in that way. I think of also one of the most impactful books I've read. It's a book called The Life You Save May Be Your Own. And it's a book that the title's taken from a Flannery O'Connor story. But it's a biography, essentially, of Flannery O'Connor, Walker Percy, Dorothy Day, and Thomas Merton, who are four 20th century Catholic writers. And the reason I bring that book up is because this Tolkien quote reminds me of it, because one of the things that struck me about the book is several of them were converts, and they all seem to have profound encounters with the Blessed Sacrament, particularly in adoration. And I remember reading stories about like them coming in to adoration, and it being this kind of foreign thing, but this beautiful thing that just captivated them. And keep coming back. And they were all writers who I think struggled with faith and doubt at times in their life. And yet they kept coming back to this beautiful mystery that they found in the Blessed Sacrament. And I think Tolkien is somebody like that, who's just captivated by that mystery, and then devotes his life to communicate that mystery, the mystery of the faith, to the world in an incredibly beautiful way. And we have the Lord of the Rings series as a result.
Right. Yeah, I think too. I want to draw attention to the word romance in this quote specifically.
Mm,
Um, I just think it's a really powerful word to use here because, how many of us in our society, I know personally I do, and I'm sure you do too. I mean, we have this desire for romance, like
yeah.
this kind of romantic love that we desire, and um, what J.R.R. Tolkien is saying here is that finds its fulfillment in the Eucharist.
Right.
It's such an important message too for those of us, our listeners who, are thinking about religious life, the priesthood, specifically, that's a huge, drawback, I think, is, I won't be able to find romance.
Mhm.
But in reality, like real romance is found in the Eucharist, with Jesus.
Yeah.
So, I think it's just like once we understand that, I think it's a huge fulfillment and consolation for our hearts.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, and I think that brings that full circle. And it's totally something that I want to do a whole nother podcast on sometimes. Just that intimacy, I think, that's found in the Blessed Sacrament, but ultimately it's what we're made for, right? We're made for intimate communion with Jesus Christ. And we find that marriage is just a sign of that. Marriage is great and beautiful and intimate, right? It's romantic, but it's just a sign of the eternal marriage of Christ and the church, the wedding feast of the Lamb. And where is that found? That consummation is found when we receive the Eucharist, at the Mass. And ultimately, I think, that brings it full circle. That was one of our first points. There's this intimacy that we're lacking in 2020, 2021. Who knows how long this is going to go on. And the parish and the Eucharist, I think, provide its fulfillment. They provide the answer to this longing that's written on the human heart. And so I think I want to ultimately leave our listeners with that understanding that the parish and the Eucharist are essential, because that is where you will find romance, glory, honor, fidelity, in the true way of all your loves on earth, as Mr. Tolkien says.
That's what I'm talking about.
You're talking about that?
Yeah, I thought that's what we were talking about.
No, that
All
is
right.
what we were talking about. That's good. Good deal.
Okay.
I have no clue how long we've been going. I didn't look at the clock when we started.
I think it's been a little under an hour, so I think we hit it right on the head, my friend.
Yeah. Well, we have 30 hours apparently for the Zoom call. Is what
let's keep it
rolling.
Okay.
But we can probably cap it off there. I think this was successful. Hopefully we can get the audio out here soon. And you can find us on social media. We're still on Facebook, still on Instagram. You can email us at colloquiumshow@gmail.com. Subscribe on wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a review. We appreciate reviews. Haven't gotten one in a little while, so keep them coming if you like it. If you don't like it, well, you can
shut up.
Yeah. I mean, obviously we don't want bad reviews, but I'd encourage honesty. If we're bad, probably send us an email, but don't do it as publicly. But hey, I don't even know. I think we're done, aren't we?
Yeah, I think so. Let's wrap it up.
All right. This has been Colloquium. Go have good conversations. Praise be Jesus Christ.
Now and forever.
Amen.
Roll Tide. Oh.